When my daughter Caroline took her very last shallow breath in the sterile, dimly lit room of the intensive care unit, the heart monitor flatlining into a singular, piercing, and relentless tone that signaled the absolute end of my world, her husband Brandon did not shed a single tear. He did not lean forward to kiss her forehead, and he did not hold her cold, pale hand. Instead, he stood near the window, quietly checked his gold designer watch, and let out a soft, impatient sigh as if he had a flight to catch or an important business meeting he was late for. I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, holding her hand, feeling the warmth leave her body as the hospital staff stepped in to disconnect the machines. My mind went back to the day she was born, a tiny, fragile bundle of life, and the promise I had made to my late wife, Patricia, on her deathbed in that very same hospital 15 years ago. I had promised Patricia that I would protect our daughter at all costs, that I would shield her from the greed of the world, and that I would ensure she was surrounded by genuine love. I had built an empire for her, but I had hidden it, hoping she would find a partner who loved her for who she was, not for the portfolio she would inherit. And now, as I looked at Brandon, who was checking his email on his phone, while his wife's body lay cold in front of him, I realized I had failed to protect her from the worst predator of all. 3 days later, standing on the wet concrete of the long gravel driveway in the Hamptons, he looked at me with eyes that held absolutely no grief or sorrow, only the cold, sharp calculation of a greedy man who had just won the lottery. My daughter was dead, and to him it was simply a transaction that had successfully cleared the bank. "Get out of my house, old man," he sneered, lifting my vintage leather suitcase and throwing it violently down the stone stairs of the porch, where it landed with a sickening, loud crack against the wet concrete of the pavement. "Caroline is dead, and so is your free ride in this house. This multi-million-dollar Hamptons villa, the $30 million life insurance policy, the trust fund. It is all mine now. You are just a piece of useless trash that I forgot to throw out when she was alive. Go to a shelter or go die in a dumpster for all I care. Just get off my property." I stood there on the driveway, the cold rain soaking through my black wool coat, watching him take a slow, deliberate sip of my own 60-year-old single malt scotch. He thought he was looking at a helpless, broken, and 72-year-old pensioner who had nowhere to go. He had absolutely no idea that he was looking at the man who had funded the very Wall Street skyline he spent his life trying to impress. He thought the game was won, but he had just made the opening move against a financial grandmaster who had spent 40 years playing the long game. Before we continue this story of absolute justice, let me know in the comments below where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a lesson to someone who mistook your kindness for weakness. The rain in the Hamptons has a very specific, quiet way of chilling you to the bone. It is not just because of the autumn temperature, but because of the sheer, crushing isolation of the empty mansions and the long, gated streets. It was a gray, relentless, and freezing drizzle that coated the entire landscape in a dull sheen of misery, perfectly matching the deep funeral black suit I was wearing. But despite the black suit, there had been no formal funeral for my daughter. Brandon had adamantly insisted on an immediate, direct cremation, without a single service, without inviting her friends, and without any gathering to honor her memory. He claimed to the hospital and the authorities that a quiet, private cremation was exactly what Caroline had wanted in her final days. But I knew the ugly truth. He could not wait to get the formal grieving period over with, so that he could bypass the legal scrutiny of a funeral, avoid facing her childhood friends, and start drawing down the insurance funds immediately to cover his debts. He wanted her memory erased as quickly and cheaply as possible. I looked down at my suitcase. It was a vintage piece I had bought in Milan 40 years ago. Sturdy and elegant, but now it lay sideways in a dirty puddle, the brass lock twisted from the impact of the fall. I did not bend down to pick it up immediately. Instead, I looked up at the man standing on the covered porch of the house I had paid for, the house I had put in my daughter's name to ensure her security. Brandon Cole stood there like a lord, surveying his new kingdom. He was wearing an Italian silk, suit that cost more than most people's cars. A suit he had bought yesterday with the credit card I had given Caroline for emergencies. He wasn't mourning, he was celebrating. The impact of the fall had broken the vintage brass latch of my Valextra suitcase, and the lid had popped open, spilling my few belongings onto the wet stone and gravel of the driveway. My clothes, a few old books, and worst of all, a bundle of letters and photos tied with a red ribbon letters my late wife Patricia had written to me when I was a young soldier, and drawings Caroline had made for me when she was a little girl, spilled out into the wind and the rain. I knelt down in the gravel, my hands shaking from the cold, and gathered the wet papers one by one as the wind tried to tear them from my grip. I looked at the water, soaking into the ink of Caroline's childhood drawings of our family cabin, a deep, silent rage building inside my chest. Brandon watched me from the porch, letting out a cruel chuckle as he took another sip of my vintage scotch. "Make sure you get all your trash, Winston," he called out. "I don't want your junk littering my driveway." In his right hand, he held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid, swirling the ice with a slow, arrogant motion. I recognized the bottle sitting on the outdoor table behind him. It was a Johnny Walker Blue Label, the limited edition 1950 vintage, one of only 100 bottles ever produced. I had been saving that bottle for a truly special occasion, perhaps the birth of a grandchild or my own 80th birthday. Now my son-in-law was using it to toast my eviction from my own home. "You are still standing there on the driveway, Winston," Brandon shouted down to me, his voice echoing off the stone facade of the mansion, his face twisting into a smug, mocking sneer. "I told you, the Uber driver is not coming all the way up the private driveway through the security gates. They don't like the gravel, and they don't like coming to estates they aren't invited to. You have to walk down to the main road. It's only half a mile. It will do your old, weak lungs some good. Get some fresh air. Unless, of course, you want to spend the night sleeping in the mud under the hedges like the stray dog you are. I'm sure the wealthy neighbors in this lane would love to see the great real estate broker sleeping in their bushes, begging for scraps of bread." I looked at him, adjusting my wet collar, my voice remaining completely flat. "You have a short memory, Brandon. When you were struggling to pay the lease on your office in the city, when you were begging the banks for a line of credit to keep your firm afloat, you didn't talk to me like this. You called me sir. You listened to my advice, and you sat at my dinner table, eating the food I paid for. And now, because my daughter is gone, you think you can treat me like dirt? You think you are the master of this house because of a piece of paper?" "That is exactly why," Brandon yelled, pointing his finger at me. "Because you have nothing now. Caroline is dead, and the law is on my side. I don't have to pretend to respect you anymore. I don't have to listen to your boring lectures about the old market cycles of the 80s. You are just a relic of the past, Winston, and I am the future. Now get the hell off my property before I have the sheriff haul you away." I adjusted my glasses, wiping the rain from the lenses with a handkerchief I kept in my pocket. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me beg. In my 40 years on Wall Street, I learned that the man who shouts is the man who has lost control. Silence is the loudest noise you can make. "Brandon," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the sound of the rain. "You are making a mistake, not a small mistake, a catastrophic one." He laughed, a harsh barking sound that grated on my ears. "The only mistake was Caroline not dying sooner," he spat out, taking a large gulp of the rare scotch as if it were cheap beer. "Do you know how hard it was pretending to like you, old man? Listening to your boring stories about the old days? Pretending to respect a washed-up retiree who lived in our guest room like a parasite. It is over. The house is mine. The insurance money clears next week, $30 million. Winston, do you know what I can do with $30 million? I knew exactly what $30 million could do. I had made that amount before breakfast in 1998. I had lost that amount in 2008 and made it back double by 2010. Money to me was a tool, a lever to move the world. To Brandon, it was just a way to feed his ego. "You are confident," I observed, watching him lean against the stone pillar. You believe the will is straightforward. He sneered at me. I saw the will, Winston. Caroline left everything to her surviving spouse. That is me, simple law. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Imagine that. The great Winston Graves being hauled away in cuffs like a vagrant. He took another step forward, his shiny loafers stopping just short of the wet steps. He didn't want to ruin his shoes. I looked at him closely, memorizing this moment. I wanted to remember the arrogance, the tilt of his chin, the way he held the glass, so that later, when he was on his knees, I could compare the two images. I will go, I said calmly. But answer me one question, Brandon. Are you absolutely certain you want to play this hand? Because once I walk out that gate, there is no taking it back. There is no apology that will fix this. He swirled the ice in his glass, looking at me with pure contempt. The only thing I am certain of is that I never want to see your wrinkled face again. You are a reminder of a life I hated. Go die in a dumpster, Winston. It is where you belong. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a stray dog. I stood there for a moment, feeling the cold water seep into my shoes. A normal father would be broken. A normal 72-year-old man would be terrified, wondering where he would sleep, wondering how he would survive. But I was not a normal man. I was Winston Graves, and Brandon Cole had just made the last mistake of his life. Just as I bent down to check the handle of my suitcase, the roar of a high-performance engine cut through the quiet hum of the rain. I turned to see a Porsche 911 Turbo in a garish shade of lipstick red tearing up the long driveway. It was moving too fast, the tires spraying gravel and water onto the manicured lawn. The car screeched to a halt just inches from where I was standing, forcing me to step back into the mud to avoid being hit. The driver's door flew open and a woman stepped out. It was Tanya. I knew her, or rather, I knew of her. She was an Instagram model who had been lingering around Brandon's circle of friends for the last 2 years. She was young, perhaps 25, with bleached blonde hair and lips that were obviously filled. She was wearing a white tennis skirt and a cropped sweater, completely inappropriate for the weather, but perfect for showing off. But it wasn't her clothes that made my blood run cold. It was what was around her neck, strung tightly against her throat, was a double strand of Akoya, pearls with a diamond clasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful physical thud. Those were Caroline's pearls. I had bought them for her 16th birthday in Tokyo. She had worn them on her wedding day. She had worn them in the casket just 3 days ago before the cremation. Or so I thought. Brandon, you liar, I whispered to myself. You stripped her body before you burned it. Tanya didn't even look at me at first, busy, shaking an umbrella open to protect her hair from the drizzle. She marched up the steps toward Brandon, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. Baby, you said he would be gone by now, she whined, her voice high and grating. I thought we were going to have the whole place to ourselves. You promised me a celebration. Brandon's face softened instantly, transforming from the cruel mask he wore for me into a sickening grin of adoration. He stepped down one level and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He is leaving right now, babe, he assured her, kissing her temple. Look, he is just packing up his trash. Tanya turned to look at me, her eyes scanning me up and down with profound disgust, looking at me the way one looks at a cockroach. You, she said simply, why is he staring at me? Make him stop, Brandon. It is creepy, he is just jealous. Brandon laughed. He knows he is looking at the new queen of the castle. Tanya touched the pearls at her throat, fingering the diamonds that I had paid for, the diamonds my daughter had loved. Nice pearls, right, Grandpa? She mocked me. Brandon gave them to me yesterday. A little welcome home gift, he said. Caroline never had the neck for them anyway. Said they looked better on me. The rage that filled me then was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was a coldness so deep it froze my breath in my lungs. They were talking about my dead daughter, my Caroline, who had passed away less than a week ago from a sudden aneurysm. And here they were, wearing her jewelry, drinking my liquor, and planning their future on her grave. It wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a desecration of her memory. You took them off her body, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Brandon shrugged, unbothered. She didn't need them where she was going. Besides, Ash doesn't wear diamonds. Tanya deserves them. She is alive. She is vibrant. She is everything Caroline wasn't in the last few years. I said nothing. I stored the information. Theft, grave robbery, in a moral sense, adultery. It was obvious now. This had been going on for a long time. While my daughter was dying in the hospital, Brandon had been with her. I realized then that my daughter's death was the most convenient thing to ever happen to him. Why are you still here? Tanya snapped. Get lost. Go to a shelter. Brandon, call security. I am going, I said. I picked up my suitcase, carrying it awkwardly by the side because the handle was broken, hugging it to my chest like a refugee. Good riddance, Brandon shouted, raising his glass. Don't come back begging. Enjoy the street, Winston. They turned their backs, opened the heavy oak double doors of the villa, and went inside. The door slammed shut, the sound final like a gunshot. The lock clicked, the deadbolt slid home. I was alone in the rain. I reached into my wet coat pocket and pulled out a heavy satellite phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang once. Graves, Pendergast answered. It is time, I said. The comprehensive protocol? Pendergast asked. Total, I replied. Freeze everything. Initiate the Omega Clause. Consider it done. Where are you? On the curb. Send the car. I walked down the long gravel driveway toward the main road, the rain lashing against my face, and the heavy, handleless suitcase clutched tightly against my chest. The driveway was lined with century-old pine trees that creaked in the wind, a dark and imposing canopy that shut out what little light remained in the sky. Every step felt like a heavy weight, but my resolve was solid. I recalled the day we had purchased this Hamptons property, how Caroline had smiled when she saw the view of the water from the master bedroom, and how she had spent weeks decorating the rooms with soft, light colors to make it feel like a sanctuary. She had built a home here, believing she was sharing it with a man who loved her. And now, her husband had turned it into a monument to his own greed, bringing his mistress into the master bedroom just 3 days after her cremation. The cold gravel shifted under my wet boots, and my fingers went numb from the strain of carrying the heavy leather case. I did not look back at the warm lights of the villa fading in the distance. I simply kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. 10 minutes after I reached the main gate, the glare of headlights cut through the dark, wet mist. It was not a taxi or a rideshare. It was a jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase, a vehicle that belonged to my private collection, gliding to a silent stop next to the curb. The rear door opened, and Arthur, executive vice president of Sovereign Private Bank, stepped out holding a large umbrella, bowing respectfully. Good evening, Mr. Graves, he said, holding the umbrella high. It has been far too long. Sir, take me to the Pierre Hotel, Arthur, I replied, handing him the suitcase. Call the team. We have work to do tonight. The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce Phantom closed with a solid, muted thud, instantly shutting out the cold rain, the wind, and the heavy silence of the Hamptons estate. As Arthur merged the massive Rolls-Royce onto the Long Island Expressway, the red and gold taillights of the morning traffic stretched out before us, like a river of fire in the dark, wet rain. I looked out the window at the passing landscape, the dark outline of the pine trees and the suburban estates of the Hamptons fading into the gray mist. My mind went back to the old days, to the 1970s, when I first arrived in Manhattan with nothing but a cheap suitcase, a single suit, and a head full of numbers. I had started as a simple clerk at a brokerage firm, earning $80 a week, sleeping on a cot in a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn. But I was fast, and I was thorough. I spent my nights studying the markets, learning the legal structures of trusts, and understanding how the big players siphoned cash through offshore accounts. By the mid-1980s, I had founded Sovereign Private Bank and managed the portfolios of the city's elite. I had survived the Black Monday crash of 1987, the dot-com collapse, and the housing crisis of 2008 because I was always 3 moves ahead of the competition. My wife, Patricia, had been my moral anchor, the one person who kept me grounded when the numbers became too large. We had bought the Hamptons estate for our daughter Caroline, putting it in her name so that no matter what happened to the markets, she would always have a safe haven. I knew every exit, every toll bridge, every bank manager, and every real estate developer in this city. I had built half the skyline these lawyers and bankers were staring at. "Julian is already at the office, sir," Arthur said, breaking the silence, as the Rolls-Royce glided smoothly over the Queensboro Bridge, the lights of Manhattan looming ahead in the dark rain. "He has the folders ready, and the bank security teams have already flagged the coal accounts." 3 days ago, right after Caroline's passing, our automated security systems at Sovereign Private Bank flagged a series of unauthorized attempts to change the primary login credentials and wire transfer permissions on the Delaware Trust Company accounts and the Cayman Island shell companies. Brandon had attempted to log in using Caroline's digital signature, trying to initiate an immediate transfer of $10 million to an offshore bank account in Macau. We blocked the transactions immediately, flagged the activity as suspected fraud, and notified the compliance team. He didn't even wait for her body to grow cold. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper, my fingers tightening into a fist in my lap. He was trying to steal the money to pay off Donald Cho's bookmakers before the will was even read. He is a desperate, stupid animal, Arthur, and like any cornered animal, he will try to claw his way out of the trap. We must ensure that the legal walls are so high and so thick that he has absolutely no room to move. Let's make sure the hailstorm hits him before he even realizes the clouds have formed in the sky. I settled back into the deep, hand-stitched leather seat, closing my eyes for a long moment, letting the gentle, passive grandfather persona I had played for a decade slip away into the dark. Winston Graves, the financial predator who had spent 40 years dominating the boardrooms of Wall Street, had officially returned to the field. Arthur sat in the driver's seat, adjusting the climate control, watching me through the rearview mirror with quiet, professional readiness. He was not just a driver. Arthur was the executive vice president of Sovereign Private Bank, the multi-billion-dollar private institution I had silently founded in the 1980s and still controlled through a series of anonymous holding companies and trusts. He knew the true scale of my wealth, and he knew that the retired simple pensioner Brandon Cole had treated like garbage was actually the sole owner of the bank that held the mortgage note on his Hamptons estate. "I took the liberty of bringing your dry clothes, sir," Arthur said, his voice low and respectful. "They are in the trunk, and I have the tablet with live access to the Omega Trust dashboard on the seat next to you." "Thank you, Arthur," I replied, my voice losing the wavering timbre of the gentle grandfather. "Brandon believes he has won the lottery. He has no idea that the vault has a timer, and I am the only one with the code. I spent 10 years playing the part of a dependent pensioner just to see if Brandon was a man of honor, or a leech who married my daughter for her family's wealth. I wanted Caroline to be loved for herself, not for the Graves empire. And the verdict? He failed spectacularly. He waited exactly 3 days after her cremation to throw me out onto the street in the rain. He didn't just fail, Arthur. He declared war. And you know what I do with people who declare war on me? You acquire them, dismantle them, and sell the scraps, Arthur replied, repeating my old Wall Street motto. Precisely, I said. I picked up the tablet. The screen glowed with the blue light of raw financial data. I logged in using the biometric fingerprint scanner, confirming my identity as Winston Graves, chairman of the board. The $30 million Brandon was celebrating was not a simple insurance payout. It was a distribution from the Graves Family Trust, managed by a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Caroline had been the beneficiary, but she had never owned the principal. The structures was designed to protect the assets from predators and gold diggers. Arthur, I said, my finger hovering over the glowing touchscreen. Initiate Protocol 0 on all accounts, connected to the Cole household immediately. I want a complete freeze on his primary and secondary checking accounts, his credit card limits reduced to 0, and his access to the home equity line of credit fully suspended. I want his financial world to cease functioning within 5 minutes. And those Singapore holdings at DBS Bank? Caroline set them up as an educational trust for her future children. But Brandon has been trying to access the principal by forging her signatures on corporate resolution documents. Drain those accounts completely, repatriate every single dollar back to the Sovereign Private Bank Master Trust in Delaware. When he calls the Singapore branch manager tomorrow morning expecting a payout, I want the bank staff to tell him that his accounts do not exist. Done, Mr. Graves, Arthur replied, tapping a command on his screen. The transfers are processing. The financial walls are closing in. 40 minutes later, we arrived at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. I went up to the private penthouse suite, which I kept permanently reserved under a corporate name. The rooms were spacious and warm, featuring high ceilings, mahogany furniture, and large glass windows that offered a panoramic view of Central Park under the dark, wet night. I changed into a dry, tailored wool suit and sat on the leather sofa in the private study. My legal team, headed by Julian Pendergast and two senior financial analysts from Sovereign Private Bank, were already waiting for me in the next room, having set up a temporary war room with secure laptops and data feeds. They had been working since the moment I made the satellite call, gathering bank records, property deeds, and corporate filings. I propped up my tablet, opening the encrypted live surveillance feed from the Hamptons estate to monitor Brandon's movements. 3 years ago, when Brandon first moved into the villa, I had hidden microphones and high-definition pinhole cameras installed in the common areas, the master study, and the library. I had told myself it was for security, but deep down, I was waiting for Brandon to make his first mistake. I watched the screen, back in the Hamptons. The heavy oak doors had barely closed behind me before Brandon unleashed the true nature he had kept hidden for years. He didn't go to comfort Tanya or pour another drink. Instead, he marched straight into my private library, the one room in the house I had explicitly asked him to respect. He kicked the door open with a violence that splintered the frame. "Get out!" he screamed at the empty room. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" He was yelling at my presence, at the ghost of the man who had paid for his lifestyle for a decade. He grabbed a blue and white porcelain vase from the mantel, Ming Dynasty piece I had purchased at an auction in London, and hurled it against the stone fireplace. It shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable shards. Next, he went for the bookshelves. He began pulling the books down by the handful, tearing the pages, ripping the leather covers, and throwing them onto the floor. These were not just books, they were history. A signed copy of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which my own father had given to me in 1972 when I first landed a job as an analyst on Wall Street, and a rare first edition of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. He was destroying them with the mindless glee of a common vandal who hates what he cannot understand. To Brandon, these were not treasures of literature or symbols of family history. They were just dusty old paper taking up valuable space. "This is going to be my personal room now," he shouted to the empty walls, his face flushed with adrenaline and expensive scotch. "I'm putting a slate pool table right here in the center and a 70-inch flat screen on that wall. No more dusty old books, no more of the old man's boring stories about the market. It is Brandon's time now, and I am the king of this castle." He swept his arm across my mahogany desk, sending my antique brass sextant crashing to the floor, before slumping into my leather executive chair and spinning around, laughing like a child. But the laughter stopped abruptly when his phone began to buzz with a harsh, urgent ringtone. The color drained from his face as he looked at the screen, the arrogant flush of victory instantly replaced by fear. He answered, bringing the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. "Vinny," Brandon whispered, his voice dropping as the high-sensitivity microphones picked up every word. "I told you not to call me on this number." He listened for a moment, pacing the room, kicking through the debris of my books. I know the deadline was yesterday," Brandon stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "But listen to me, Vinny. Everything has changed. Caroline is dead. The funeral was 3 days ago, and the death certificate is being processed. Do you know what that means? It means the policy pays out. $30 million, Vinny. 30 million! He paused, listened to the voice on the other end, his jaw clenching as Vinny's threats came through the line. I could easily imagine what Vinny was saying. Vinny was an enforcer for a major sports betting ring operating out of Queens, backed by Donald Cho's Macau gambling syndicate. Vinny didn't care about death certificates or processing times. He cared about cash, and his syndicate had a reputation for enforcing their debts with extreme physical violence. They had already cornered Brandon in the dark corner of a parking garage in White Plains last Monday night, as he was walking to his car after dinner with Tanya. Vinny's two primary local enforcers, a muscle-bound guy named Tony and another named Chen, had stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking his path. Tony had grabbed Brandon by the collar of his suit, slamming him against the cold brick wall of the garage, while Chen stepped up close behind him, pushing the cold, sharp blade of a pocket knife against his lower ribs. Chen had whispered in a low, gravelly voice that if the first cash installment of $50,000 wasn't delivered by Friday night, they would start by harvesting his fingers, and then they would pay a personal visit to Megan's family home on Long Island to collect the rest. Brandon had wet his pants right there in the garage, trembling with fear, promising them that he would have the money within a week, that his wife was extremely sick and had a massive life insurance policy that would clear immediately upon her passing. He had sold his wife's life to buy himself a few days of safety from the mob, and he had been counting down the hours in the hospital room, waiting for her heart to flatline. "Stop talking about my knees, Vinny, and stop threatening me," Brandon snapped, trying desperately to regain his fading bravado. "You aren't going to lay a single finger on me. Once the 30 million clears, I will be one of your biggest clients. I will pay you the $500,000 plus the full interest, plus a generous tip, just for being patient for a few more days. I just need 1 week for the insurance company to release the funds. I have the Hamptons villa as collateral too. It's worth $10 million on the market, easy, and I am the sole owner now. The old man is gone. I kicked him out onto the road tonight. There is no one left to block the sale of this property." He hung up, letting out a long, shaky breath, and poured himself another glass of wine, his hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled. He looked at a framed photograph of Caroline sitting on my desk, a photo of her graduation day where she was smiling, radiant and full of life. "Sorry, babe," Brandon said to the photo, his voice dripping with false sentiment. "You were worth more dead than alive. Nothing personal, just business." He threw the photo face down into the cold ashes of the fireplace. I watched the screen from my hotel suite, a cold, deadly clarity settling over me. Brandon had just confessed his motive to an empty room. My daughter was nothing more than a payday to him. He was $500,000 in debt to organized crime, and her death was his only way to stop Vinny's enforcers from breaking his legs. He believed he was celebrating his victory, not realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. And tomorrow morning, at the reading of the will, I was going to pull the lever. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m. sharp, the double mahogany doors of Pendergast and Associates, located on the 45th floor of a premier Wall Street skyscraper, swung open. Brandon Cole walked in, looking slightly disheveled, his suit wrinkled and his hair uncombed. Behind him was Tanya, chewing gum loudly and scrolling through her phone with an annoyed expression. Brandon's morning had been a complete disaster. When they had tried to check out of the boutique hotel where they had spent the night, every single one of his credit cards had been declined at the front desk. The hotel manager had demanded immediate payment, and the valet parking attendant had refused to return Tanya's lipstick-red Porsche until they paid the $300 overnight parking fee in cash. They had been forced to leave the sports car behind, scraping together their last $60 in cash to take a cheap yellow taxi to the law office, Brandon's pride severely bruised. But the moment he stepped foot inside the sleek, quiet, and wood-paneled lobby of the prestigious Wall Street firm on the 45th floor, his arrogant, self-important confidence returned in full force, pushing aside the humiliation of the morning. He stood tall, smoothing down his wrinkled suit jacket, looking around the glass walls and the polished marble floors as if he already owned the entire building. He believed he was here today, simply to sign a few release papers, collect his $30 million, and walk out as one of Manhattan's newest millionaires. Today, all his crippling gambling debts, Vinny's threats, and his domestic worries would finally vanish into thin air. Tanya, too, seemed to regain her pride, walking past the receptionist without looking at her, popping her gum and checking her reflection in the gold-trimmed mirrors of the hallway. Julian Pendergast, wearing a bespoke charcoal wool suit that cost more than Brandon's entire annual salary, met them in the reception lobby. His eyes were cold, clinical, and completely empty of any warmth as he looked at Brandon's disheveled appearances, showing them into the private boardroom with a brief, stiff nod. Brandon slid into one of the expensive leather armchairs, crossing his legs and leaning back with an air of immense self-importance. "Let's make this process quick, Pendergast," he said, tapping his fingers on the table and checking his watch with a sigh. "I have a lot of business meetings scheduled for this afternoon, and a wire transfer to coordinate. Just show me where to sign the final release form so we can get the funds transferred to my primary accounts immediately." Julian sat opposite them, at the head of the conference table, his face a completely unreadable, clinical mask. He opened a thin black leather folder, adjusting his reading glasses. "Before we discuss the distribution of the estate's capital, Mr. Cole, we need to review the entire framework of the documents," Julian said, his voice carrying the calm, cold authority of a senior partner. "As you are aware, the primary will that your late wife, Caroline, signed 5 years ago left the entirety of her assets, properties, and trust distributions to her surviving spouse. That would be you, however. 6 months ago, during her final hospital stay, she executed a specific, legally binding rider clause to the will." "A rider?" Brandon frowned, his eyes narrowing, his fingers gripping the armrests of the leather chair. "What kind of rider? It doesn't change the primary beneficiary, does it?" "My lawyer said the surviving spouse clause is airtight." "It adds a condition," Julian explained, sliding a single sheet of cream-colored cardstock paper across the polished table. "A moral turpitude in marital monogamy provision. It states in clear, unambiguous legal terms that any and all distributions of the inheritance, including the $30 million trust principal, the Hamptons property, and the personal accounts, are strictly contingent upon the beneficiary having maintained a completely faithful, monogamous relationship during the entirety of the marriage. If the surviving spouse is found to have committed adultery, the entire estate reverts immediately and irrevocably to the secondary beneficiary." Brandon laughed, a loud, high-pitched and nervous sound that vibrated off the high ceilings and the mahogany walls of the boardroom, his eyes darting frantically between Julian and the rider agreement. "Adultery, this is absolute, total nonsense, Pendergast. A complete, pathetic joke. Caroline was my entire world. We had a beautiful marriage, and I was completely faithful to her from the day we said our vows until her final, tragic breath in the hospital. You can't prove a single thing. This is just a desperate, manufactured attempt by the old man Winston to keep the family money he thinks is his property. I want to see the proof right now, or I am walking out of this building, hiring the best defense attorneys in New York, and suing this firm and Winston Graves for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Julian did not say a word. Instead, he slid a thick, heavy black binder across the table, opening the cover page to reveal a series of color photographs. The first page was a high-resolution photograph taken by a private investigator with a telephoto lens, showing Brandon and Tanya kissing on the balcony of a luxury hotel in Miami. The date stamp on the bottom of the photo was from exactly 2 years ago, while Caroline was undergoing chemotherapy in Seattle. Julian flipped the page, revealing copies of hotel receipts, first-class airline tickets, and credit card statements showing expensive designer handbag and jewelry purchases for Tanya, all charged to the emergency credit card I had given my daughter. The next 20 pages of the binder contained printed, chronological transcripts of text messages between Brandon and Tanya, extending back over the last 2 years of Caroline's illness. In these messages, they openly discussed how they would spend the $30 million trust money once Caroline passed away, planning details of their future life together in Monaco and Miami. They mocked her failing health, joke about her chemotherapy sessions, and express their sheer impatience for her heart to stop beating. In one message, dated the night Caroline was admitted to the intensive care unit, Brandon wrote, "She's in the ICU now. The doctor says it's a matter of days. Soon we'll have the Hamptons house and the $30 million. I'm already looking at yachts," Tanya had replied, "finally. I'm so sick of waiting in the shadows. Make sure the old man doesn't get a penny of it." Brandon had written back, "Don't worry, babe. Winston is a senile old pensioner. I'll kick him out of the house the moment the death certificate is in my hands. He won't know what hit him." These messages were printed out in black and white, complete with cell carrier stamps, IP addresses, and metadata. It was a complete, undeniable diary of their cold-blooded betrayal and greed. Tanya looked at the binder, her jaw dropping, the gum she was chewing falling onto the table. Brandon stared at the photos, the color completely vanishing from his face, his chest heaving with panic as his breathing became shallow. "Brandon, what is this?" Tanya shrieked, slamming her phone onto the table. "You told me she didn't know anything. You told me we were safe, and that the will was straightforward. I left my modeling contract. I moved out of my apartment, and I've been hiding in your shadow for 2 years because you promised me we would get $30 million and a Hamptons mansion. You told me we would buy a yacht in Monaco, and now you're telling me you're banked and the money is gone?" "Tanya, shut up, shut up!" Brandon hissed, his voice cracking with desperation as he tried to pull her back into her seat. "Pendergast, this is a setup. This is a forgery. Winston Graves paid someone to fake these photos. He wants to steal what is rightfully mine. I'll sue you. I'll sue this entire firm. I'll go to the papers." "You can try, Mr. Cole," Julian said, his voice flat and completely calm as he adjusted his folder. "But the metadata on these digital files has already been verified by a court-appointed forensic expert. The transactions, the hotel bookings, and the transfers match the dates exactly. You have no legal standing, and as of this moment, you are trespassing in these offices." Brandon's face went completely white. He stared at the photos, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This is a violation of privacy." Brandon stammered, sweat pouring down his neck. "You can't use this in court." "It is already in court, Mr. Cole," Julian said coldly. "The judge signed the verification order 2 hours ago. The estate, including the $30 million trust, the New York accounts, and the Hamptons villa, has officially reverted to the secondary beneficiary, the Omega Trust, of which the sole trustee is Winston Graves." Just then, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open, and I walked in, wearing a tailored charcoal gray Italian suit, my posture straight, looking Brandon dead in the eye. Beside me were 2 large silent security guards. You? Brandon gasped, his eyes wide with absolute horror as he looked at the man he had thrown out into the rain just 12 hours ago. "How are you here? Why are you wearing that suit? You're just a broken 72-year-old pensioner, living off a pension." "I built the very financial foundation of this firm, Brandon," I said, sitting slowly at the head of the boardroom table, folding my hands. "And I silently control Sovereign Private Bank, which holds the primary mortgage note on the Hamptons villa. You are officially evicted from the property today. Your access cards are deactivated, and all your personal and business bank accounts are frozen. The Singapore holdings have been drained and repatriated to the master trust, meaning you have exactly $0 to your name." Tanya stood up from her chair, screaming in panic, her voice shrill. "Brandon, what the hell is happening here? Where is the $30 million? Why are my credit cards declined, and why did the hotel take my Porsche? You promised me we would be rich today." "Shut up, Tanya," I said, turning my eyes to her, "and remove the double strand of Akoya pearls from around your neck. They were purchased by me for my daughter's 16th birthday. and they belong to her estate. If you do not unclamp them and place them on this table right now, the federal officers waiting in the hallway will arrest you for grand theft and possession of stolen property." Shaking with terror, Tanya unclasped the pearls, threw them onto the table, and ran out of the room crying, only to be stopped in the lobby by two waiting police officers who handcuffed her as an accomplice. Brandon fell from his expensive leather chair onto his knees, crawling across the office carpet toward me, grabbing the edge of the mahogany boardroom table with his trembling, sweating hands, his face red and stained with tears. "Winston, please, you have to help me. You have to save my life. The bookmakers, Vinny's men, they are going to kill me today if I don't pay the $500,000 plus the interest by noon. Vinny called me on my private number last night. They know where I am. They said they would break my legs and throw me in the East River if I didn't deliver the cash. Please, Winston, just lend me the cash from the trust. I'll sign anything. I'll give you the house back. I'll be your servant. Just save my life." I looked down at him with a cold, absolute, and clinical detachment, my voice quiet but cutting through his cries. "Do you want to know what my daughter Caroline wrote in her personal diary during her final, painful weeks in the hospital room, Brandon?" I asked, leaning forward over the table, looking directly into his bloodshot, terrified eyes. She wrote that she had known about Tanya for over a year. She wrote about finding the credit card receipts for the expensive diamonds and the secret flights to Miami in your dresser drawer. She wrote about the nights she lay awake in the hospital bed, listening to you, whispering on your phone in the hallway, laughing with your mistress while she was fighting for her breath. She realized that the man she had married, the man she had supported through his debts, was simply waiting for her heart to flatline so he could inherit her family's wealth. But she didn't want to hurt me, and she didn't want to show her heartbreak to a parasite like you. So, while you were out celebrating with Tanya, Caroline called Julian Pendergast to her hospital bed. She executed this moral turpitude rider clause, ensuring that every single dollar, every piece of property, and the very roof over your head would return directly to me, leaving you with absolutely nothing but the dust on your hands and the clothes on your back. She protected her father and her family's honor from her deathbed, Brandon. And now it is my turn to execute her final wishes and protect her memory. I sat back in my chair, looking down at him. "I know Vinny," I said softly, leaning forward. "In fact, Sovereign Private Bank holds the primary debt and liquid lines for Donald Cho, the boss of Vinny's entire syndicate. I called Donald Cho at 6 o'clock this morning, Brandon. Donald Cho, the primary leader of the entire East Coast sports betting syndicate, whose multi-million-dollar real estate developments and front companies rely entirely on commercial loans and liquidity lines provided by Sovereign Private Bank. When I explained to Donald that one of his enforcers, Vinny, was threatening to break the legs of my son-in-law over a $500,000 sports gambling debt, Donald was extremely cooperative. He did not want to risk losing his bank's backing over a minor associate. I purchased your entire $500,000 debt note from his organization this morning for 10 cents on the dollar, in exchange for a minor, favorable adjustment on the interest rates of his Queens properties. I am your primary, sole creditor now, Brandon, and under the official terms of the debt transfer agreement we signed at 6:30 this morning, I am calling in the full, outstanding balance of the principal, including the accumulated interest, the syndicate's fees, and the late penalties, by exactly noon today. I am not as patient, as understanding, or as polite as Vinny, and I do not need to use physical weapons or threats of violence to dismantle a man. I will use the full, crushing weight of the legal and banking systems. I will file the foreclosure paperwork on your remaining assets, seize your sports car from the hotel valet, garnish your future prison wages, and ensure that you never own so much as a basic bank account or a cell phone for the rest of your natural life on this earth. Then the double mahogany doors of the boardroom opened once again with a soft, heavy click, and two tall, stern Federal Bureau of Investigation agents in dark wool suits walked inside, holding stainless steel handcuffs in their hands. "Brandon Cole," the lead agent said, his voice completely official, dry and devoid of any emotion, as he stepped forward, grabbing Brandon by the shoulder and pulling him up from the floor. "You are officially under arrest for federal wire fraud, document forgery, corporate embezzlement, bank fraud, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you." Brandon stared at the badges in the agent's hands, his eyes wide with a manic terror, his body trembling violently as he realized the full, crushing weight of the federal system was descending upon him. Brandon broke down completely right there on the floor, sobbing hysterically like a child and begging for mercy, his voice a high-pitched, desperate shriek that vibrated off the high ceilings and the glass windows of the boardroom. "Winston, please, I beg you. Don't do this to me. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them we're family. Tell them you're not pressed to prosecute. I'll pay back every single dollar I owe you. I swear on my life I will find a way. You can't let them take me to a federal facility, Winston. Vinny's syndicate enforcers have people on the inside. They will find me in prison, and they will kill me. Please, Winston, say something. You have to help me." I did not say a word, and I did not look at him. The agents pulled his arms behind his back, clicking the cuffs tightly around his wrists, and dragged him out of the boardroom. His knees were dragging along the carpet, his expensive Italian silk suit scuffing against the floor, a final pathetic display of his complete ruin. I stood up slowly from my leather executive chair at the head of the boardroom table, the silence in the room returning, heavy and absolute, as the heavy doors closed behind the agents. I looked at the table and picked up Caroline's double strand of Akoya pearls from the polished mahogany wood, holding them gently and reverently in the palm of my hand. They felt cold and heavy against my skin, but they felt clean, completely free of the greasy contamination and the moral rot of the last week. The parasite was gone, and the infection had finally been cut out of our family history for good. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan under the gray, falling rain. I could see the Empire State Building and the bridges in the distance, standing firm against the elements. I felt a strange, quiet, and profound sense of peace settle over my chest for the very first time since my daughter's tragic passing. The battle was over. The justice was complete. We had won the game, and her memory was finally safe from his greed. I returned to the Hamptons villa that afternoon, standing in the middle of the broken library, looking at the torn book covers and the shattered porcelain shards of the Ming Dynasty vase scattered across the floor. I hired a team of master European woodworkers and restoration specialists to fully rebuild the study. They spent 3 weeks repairing the mahogany shelves, restoring the leather bindings of my collection, and placing the signed copy of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations back on the stone mantel, restoring my family's history to its rightful place. But I did not keep the house for myself. I established the Caroline Graves Foundation, a $50 million charitable foundation headquartered in a beautiful limestone building in Manhattan. The foundation is dedicated to providing legal aid, financial education, emergency housing, and security resources to women who are victims of financial abuse, domestic predators, and predatory spouses. The Hamptons Villa was converted into a peaceful retreat center under the foundation's name, a sanctuary where survivors of abuse could find peace, safety, and a chance to rebuild their lives in dignity. The grand opening ceremony of the foundation was held in the spring, attended by hundreds of community leaders, and I dedicated the entire project to my daughter's strength, grace, and memory. Every spring, the blue and purple hydrangeas Caroline planted out front bloom beautifully, a reminder that, even after the coldest winter, life returns. I still live in New York, looking out at the skyline I helped build, a city of steel and stone that stands firm against the wind. Brandon was prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Federal Court of the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. During the 2-week trial, the prosecution presented the high-definition surveillance footage from my private library, where Brandon had destroyed my books and openly confessed to Vinny on the phone that his wife was worth more to him dead than alive. The jury watched the video in complete silence, and it took them less than 2 hours to return a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. The federal judge, a stern woman named Judge Evelyn Vance, sentenced Brandon to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, with absolutely no possibility of parole. Today, Brandon works in the prison laundry room, sorting wet bedsheets for 50 cents an hour, his custom silk suits replaced by a coarse orange jumpsuit, his former high society friends and Wall Street colleagues pretending they never even knew his name. Vinny's illegal sports betting syndicate was fully dismantled by the authorities, and Donald Cho's real estate developments were foreclosed on by Sovereign Private Bank, his assets sold off to pay for the foundation's programs. Tanya was convicted of grand theft and conspiracy as a co-conspirator, serving a 3-year sentence in a state correctional facility, where she spends her days cleaning floors instead of posing for Instagram photos. Megan, Brandon's sister, who had helped him forge the signatures on the DBS Singapore documents, was also convicted of document forgery and bank fraud, serving a 5-year sentence in a federal prison in West Virginia. My name is Winston Graves, and this is how I saved my daughter's legacy by cutting off the rot. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't the one in the shadows. It is the one wearing a silk suit, sitting right across from you, asking for a check.